You talk, well, you're also a licensed respiratory therapist. Martial arts are always talking about breath and breathing. What did you see with your work in the hospital situation that might be of interest to martial artists? What substantiates what we already know and what we don't know? What would we find of interest there?
Well, deep breathing from the belly, gas exchange. Good gas exchange is really important. Staying, I guess you'd say, relatively calm or in the zone. That's I think interesting, because when I was weaning people from mechanical ventilation, getting them off, get their breathing tube out, those are things we had to watch. Was, were they aerating well? Were they breathing, getting a good deep breath? Were they calm? Same thing. One thing I noticed working in trauma-intensive care units and seeing martial artists on the outside is, when you get hit in the rib cage, fracture a rib, break a rib, it's definitely does affect your breathing. So I think those are probably some of the more commonalities between martial arts and looking at medicine.
You ran kind of close to the emergency room. Tell me, I know the story because obviously we talked about it previously, but why don't you share with the listeners the story, the cutting story? I think that's an impressive little story.
Well, first of all, I got my first glimpse of Filipino martial arts when I was maybe 14, 15 years old, from a friend's grandfather from the Philippines, and then later on I had an opportunity to train in Kali and Eskrima. And I'd always heard different stories about, what a good knife fighter does. And I saw some people who had this idea that, you only slashed, or, the main thing was to stab. And later I heard from one of my, I think one of my instructors or one of my seniors was, a good knife fighter doesn't stab, they slash. So I was working down in Dallas, and one Friday morning, very early, before the Knife and Gun Club usually got started, 3 gentlemen were brought in to the intensive care from the operating rooms, and they had all been slashed, and slashed very, very specifically across the brachial arteries at the elbows and up around the clavicles, up around the collarbones, and I saw, I think, a couple of femoral slices, and it was really interesting. And I was staying next to one of the old attending surgeons, and he said, "Son, go up and take a look." So I went up and took a look, and I went back and stood next to him, and he said, "What did you see?" And I said, "Well, I saw these slashes in places A, B, and C." And he said, "What do you think?" And I said, "A pro." And he says, "Yeah." And that was interesting. And one of the few stabbings I saw was accidental. So I always thought that was kind of interesting.
Tell me about broken noses.
Yes, the myth of if I take my palm and smash your nose in an upward direction, that the cartilage is going to go through and pierce your brain. Hardly. I've seen enough people who've been in car accidents who have hit their heads on dashboards, etc., and I haven't seen anybody die from that yet. And let's see, another myth I heard was if you took a gun, a pistol, and stuck it point blank to your head and pulled the trigger, that you would die. And when I was working in Dallas, I saw a gentleman who had put a .38 caliber handgun to his temple, pulled the trigger, and lived to talk about it. Unfortunately, he knocked out his optic nerves and was completely blind. So it's interesting. Sometimes our urban legends or myths don't always pan out true.
What's the cycle of life and the cycle of destruction?
Whew, that could be a whole other discussion into itself. That's talking about the wuxing, or the gogyo in Japanese, and that's the creative cycle, the sheng cycle of the 5 elements. So, for example, going from the wood element to the fire element to the earth element to the metal and to the water. And then the destructive cycle is kind of a counterbalancing cycle, like, for example, the fire counters the metal, which counters the wood, which counters the earth, which counters the water. So we use that extensively in traditional or classical medicine, and I've heard of some people trying to do that in martial arts, but I think it's been more theoretical than it has been practical.
Acupuncturists use herbs in conjunction with your needles and the pressure points and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the big question. We've all heard about Dit Da Jiao.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? How is it used?
Well, Dit Da Jiao is an herbal preparation which can be either internally taken or externally. Internal, external applications vary in terms of the content of the herbs as well as the dosages. Typically, for an external Dit Da Jiao preparation, you take a number of herbs and put them in, say, a gallon of vodka or brandy or tequila, and you let them sit for X number of months, and then you can use the liniment that's made and apply it to your skin and bones.
What's the difference between that and absorbing?
I'm sorry?
What's the difference between that and, say, like buying Absorbing Junior off the rack?
Well, the herbs have different types of healing properties in terms of moving qi, moving blood, breaking up blood stasis, so like breaking up a bruise. And it's a very old tradition, and many schools have their own particular formulas, varying from, let's say, 5 herbs to 30 plus herbs. I'm really not all that familiar with the Absorbing Juniors. Never used them.
And I look at some of the herbs that go into that, and I was looking at them, and I was going, okay, well, there's a topical analgesic, there's a stimulant, and I kind of went through the list, and of course I wasn't able to look them all up, but you're looking at it and you're going, well, yeah, that does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to increase circulation, it's going to relieve some of the pain. An interesting concoction. What's the key, in your opinion, to getting the most out of your training experience? How do you get the most from your teacher? Because having spent time in Japan, having a language barrier and so forth, you had to approach it differently, clearly. Do you still bring that same thing to the States when you're talking English first? How does it change your perspective? How do you get the most from your instructor?
Boy, in Japan, partially because of my language barrier when I first started, but also I found down the road, a lot of learning is, not verbal. You're observing. You're waiting for the teacher. Some teachers don't give explanations. Fortunately, my teacher did. His teacher did not. He just taught by example, and that was pretty much how it went. And then later on, when my Japanese had improved a bit, and I could ask questions because I wasn't Japanese, and that was that. And so the Japanese guys in the group took advantage of that. So whenever David asked a question, boy, they had their ears open and oftentimes the notepad ready to go.
Why is it you were able to ask the question? Just because
because I was not Japanese. I was different. And that, to understand Japanese culture, I recommend people read books like Straight Jacket Society or Japan: A Reinterpretation by Patrick Smith. Those are good myth-busting books. They don't always give the most. They don't always give the impression we want to see, but I think they speak relatively true. They're more journalistic approaches. They're not academic, but I say they bring some truth into daily life in Japan and how things work.
So you were able to ask questions because you were a foreigner.
Because I was a foreigner, I could ask questions. I didn't always, though. After a while, I learned just to observe, and it was funny. One of my teachers from China, I was working with him in his clinic, and we were seeing patients together. And later, I asked him about a particular technique he did, and I asked him if he could show me again. And he looked at me and he says, "You really need to pay closer attention." And after that, I didn't ask him so many questions, and I remembered that when I went to Japan. So I didn't feel the need to keep asking so many questions. It was more important to observe it and digest it and find my own answers.